So we hit this little snag of trying to combine two seemingly the same numbers, but they're actually of different classes. So we've got decimal, dot decimal, and float. So we're going to actually kind of look into this on the Python only side, so outside of the context of Django, and then we'll look at it inside of our project. So first and foremost, we want to open up the Python shell. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into Python. And this could be pretty much any version of Python or any recent version of Python, whether it's Python 2 or Python 3. This concept is still very much the same. So the idea that, when we work with numbers in general, you might intuitively remember them from like algebra, like generally what a number would be like. So write this, that's just a number. But in Python, they call it, well, if we do type and then get the type of it, it's called an integer, right? So hopefully you already know that. The next thing is if we use decimal places, by default, that type is not a decimal number, but rather a float. Okay, so that float is nice because it comes in by default with this, but we actually set up our module as a decimal field. So what that means is we have to use the decimal. So if we go from decimal, import decimal, we can actually see that if I do ABC equals to decimal, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and I do ABC, we've got a lot longer. So this is a binary representation. This is how it's stored on the database, right? Or excuse me, this is how Python represents it in Python. So this is coming down to the actual binary level of how this number is looked at. So this is a little bit more precise, as far as I understand, is a little bit more precise than using a float number in terms of how the system works. So when I try to add ABC or this decimal number to, some other number with a decimal in it, it's actually trying to add a decimal and a float. That's all it's trying to do. So we can actually overcome this by importing from math. Not from math. We'll just do from math import fsum. And we can actually sum these things up using fsum. So we do fsum and then ABC and then the float number. Oh, we want to put this into a list or an array here. Well, it's actually a list. So we put it in there and then it'll actually sum it up for us. And it does it in a different way than just the decimal, right? So if I actually did that and said type, well, let's actually write out type of this fsum here. We get a float as what's returned. So this number itself is a lot easier to work with than these decimal numbers. So we're actually going to change a lot of our summation to using this fsum. Okay, so that's how it's been represented here. Let's go ahead and try that out in our actual project. So we're going to scroll up. I'm actually just going to, instead of importing fsum itself, I'll just import math. And then we're going to come down to our order total because this is where that error was. We see that it says update total, line 32. We're going to do that here. So I'll just say math.fsum, and we will put this into a list here. And now we've got the sum of what these two numbers would be. So we save that, we refresh in here, and I'm actually getting the decimal value here. It's not from, so if I go ahead and print out, let's go ahead and print out the type of this value. And I'm going to print it out like that. And we'll just say total. Oh, what am I thinking here? Let's go ahead and redo that a little bit. And there we go. So we'll print out the new total variable that we've got there, but we're going to print out the type of it so we can actually see that type. We refresh in here and it goes back in there. Oops. Let's save that. Oh, it's not calculating it. It's not going to calculate it every time. So what I have to do is I'm going to go ahead and log out again and just try this one more time. I have an empty cart, products, t-shirt, add to cart. Go to the cart, check out, and I've got that number again, and it shows me that it actually returned a float, but it didn't return it in a very compelling way. We want to see it in a new format. And, well, that's actually pretty easy. What we're going to do here is just say formatted total equals to format, new total, and then we would just do .2f. And there we go. So now we've got our formatted total in here, and the value that's going to be saved. So here's a couple things to know. The value that's going to be saved, we saved it in as this total. This is only going to save 2 decimal places. So even though the display is showing it a little bit differently, the actual final number is going to show up in the database. It's going to store as this number. So even if it's calculating it a little differently. But we actually want to make sure that that's true. So let's go ahead and log in again and log out to cancel out our session. We'll go to products, hat, add to cart, checkout. Now it's actually showing us the accurate number because of this summation stuff right here. So it might be a good idea to have that same process happen in our cart model, right? So when we do this addition stuff down here, we also might want to have that F sum related things. It's not entirely required because of what we're doing here, but I want to make sure that, hey, there's never a problem with the subtotal somehow being considered a decimal and then our addition, or if I do any tax. I think I even did it with this 1.0. I think we even saw that. So let's try that out, and I'll do instance.total equals to the subtotal times 1.08, as in adding an 8% tax. Oops, not 7, but 8% tax. Let's actually see that. So again, I'm going to go ahead and add something to the product this time, or the cart. Oops, we already had that one. Let's go ahead and add this t-shirt. And again, I have this same error, right? So unsupported type for this, and that's because of how these two things are coming together. So in this case, I actually can't, turn this into the sum. We're not summing these things together. I'm doing a multiplication. So I just want to make sure that these are the same numbers. And well, I can use a float here like this, and this is going to be inferred as a float number anyway, but let's just turn it into a float, refresh and do continue. And what do you know? It actually works. We go to products, add another product, and it's still working. And it's actually calculating the total based off of that. So it's really doing what it needs to do. If we wanted to do the binary representation, we would turn those into decimal numbers. So we'll go ahead and from decimal, import the class of decimal. Okay. And then bring this down here and change these from float numbers to decimal numbers. But again, once we save it, once it actually goes into the database, it's only going to store 2 of those decimal places. So let's try it again. Go to products. I'll actually just remove a product. It still does that same calculation. And there we go. So it's actually doing that. If I go to checkout, it's giving me an appropriate checkout for this. And we also just showed that the checkout process works up until this point. Now, we still have to add in the address, and then we can pretend to calculate a shipping total from that address. We're not actually going to do it, but we can pretend to. That way you can kind of see generally how you would go about doing that. So that's something we still need to do. So stay with us.